Okay. I think we're going to go ahead and get started for the sake of time. If you didn't hear me, please go ahead and put the age of your child in our chat box. And we're going to go ahead and get started. And so hello, everyone. On behalf of Vivvi, I'm so happy to welcome you here today. My name is Christie Pinheiro, and I'm the Director of School Operations here at Vivvi. And I'm joined here by Tabitha St. Jacobs. She is a writer, activist, and anti-racism educator. Today, we're going to talk about some of the tough parts about parenting, tackling those tricky questions about race, gender, and cultural identity. These conversations with my own two children continue to be a work in progress for me and my husband, but I know how important they are to a child's sense of identity and belonging, so I really could not be more excited to learn more from our guest today. Tabitha is one of the leading voices on anti-racist parenting and writes often about raising multiracial children in parents, good housekeeping, and more. She also has a really valuable biweekly column titled Raising Anti-Racist Kids, which I highly recommend checking out. She's a great resource, and I can't wait to hear what she has to say today. If you're not already familiar with Vivvi, I'll give you a quick overview of what we do. Vivvi is on a mission to reinvent childcare and early learning for today's families. We currently have 11 campuses in and around New York City, including our newest one in Westchester. And we specialize in learning and care for children ages 6 weeks to 5 years old. We also partner with employees of all sizes to bring childcare and early learning to their working families as a benefit. As we truly believe it's our mission to support the whole family, not just in high quality learning experiences for children, but also with education and resources for those early years, which is why we're hosting this conversation today. Before we get started, let me just share a few logistics before we dive in. First, I just want to say that I appreciate so many of you are here today. I know you have so many things to do, and we're just grateful that you could carve out some time to be here with us. We have 45 minutes together. I'll use the first 30 minutes to run through some really thoughtful strategies and tips with Tabitha. And then we'll go through some of your questions. The chat function is open, so please feel free to drop a question in at any time. We'll do our best to either answer the question throughout our webinar or at the end. Finally, I want to acknowledge that identity and belonging is a really big topic, especially when it comes to young children. There's no way we're going to cover it all today in the 45 minutes, but I promise that we'll walk away with at least one practical, applicable tool that will help you feel more equipped and hopefully a little less stressed. I also want to quickly call out that we're going to be hosting a very special play group this weekend at our Vivvi Tribeca campus, where Tabitha and her partner Adam will be leading activities for the children 0 to 5, focused on identity and belonging. They will lead some movement activities, share some great books that are ideal for this age and more. The playgroup is free, and it's a great way to start this conversation with your little ones. So if you're around, we'd love you to join us. We're going to drop the website in the chat box. It is vivvi.com/events. All right, if we're ready, let's dig in. Welcome, Tabitha. Want to go ahead and ask you a question to get us started. First off, what is identity and belonging, and why is it something that we need to address in parenting? When do we start, and why is it so important for parents with children who are at the youngest of ages?
Starting with the easy questions. First of all, Christy, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm truly honored to be a part of this conversation. So we're gonna dive right in. What is identity and belonging? So identity can be external, but it's also perceived externally. For babies, that perception of identity can start from as young as 3 months, is what the research says. And of course, at 3 months, they do not have the language to really express this, and they do so through behavior, because we know that behavior is communication for kids that are super young. So identity is a reflection of who the child views as themselves in relation to the world around them. And this could be pertaining to race and ethnicity and gender and religion, skin color, all of these things. And belonging is an interesting word because it brings up questions like, what are kids belonging to? Who creates the community that they belong to, and who holds power and privilege within that community? Who gets to set the norms? Who gets to decide who belongs to the community? Who gets to decide who doesn't? Power also brings up questions around male dominance, also heteronormativity, white dominance, and so forth. And because we live in a society that is dominated by all of these things, those with power within the community, they get to have a say in terms of, do we decenter these norms that include more people and exclude others, or what are the other choices that we have? And belonging sort of implies an in and an out. Some people belong, some people don't. So the question becomes, how do we nurture a community where more people belong, where we're bringing more people in? And we can do that through a constant sort of reevaluation of the norms and practices within the community as it pertains to the home, the classroom, the playground, and so forth. Can we move to slide 4? Awesome. So why do we need to address this with kids, especially young kids? This country was built on systems of separation. So just to give you a little bit of framing around that, we're not going to delve into that a lot today. We're going to talk about specifically why is it important for us to talk about these issues with kids, but we also need to understand the context with which we have been living in this country, with which we have been existing in this country. So we need to have discussions with our children, because we know that our kids internalize messages about identity and belonging from all around them. And if we're not addressing it with them, if we're not creating sort of a container for them to be able to know that they can come to us to process and to work through some of these questions and issues they're having, they're going to be making assumptions based on media, based on community, based on all of these other things. So we as parents and caregivers, we want to be able to create a safe place for them where they can process these things with us. I'm going to share with you a little bit of research. If we can go to the next slide, specifically around, this is really small, so I think we can share this afterwards with you all via email. But these are just some markers around research that was done around when kids start noticing age and how it can potentially shift their behavior at certain ages. And as you can see, it starts as young as 3 months, and kids can form ideas around race that can change their behaviors and so forth. And this also applies to other forms of identity. And if you're feeling like, okay, we get it, my kid is forming ideas around this, I don't know how to deal with it, we're going to teach you some lessons today, and we're going to delve into that soon. One thing to also note is that research shows that kids start having questions about identity and belonging before adults think that they are actually doing it, and before adults think that they are ready to be having these conversations. So we're a little behind the curve, and our kids are sort of going full steam ahead. So it's up to us to really catch up.
Thanks, Tabitha. I have a question for you as we keep going. Many parents on this call, and myself included, have children that are preschool, toddlers, and sometimes even babies. How do you start talking about some of these big topics, and with children that are 3, 2 years old, and how does that conversation change as the children get older?
That's a really good question. Can we move to the next slide? So firstly, I want to say that we're not going to be sitting down with a 3-year-old and trying to have a conversation around male dominance and white dominance. I think the way that it begins is through parent modeling. Our language, our behavior as it pertains to belonging and identity matters an immense amount, because we all know that our kids are looking to us to learn about the world around them, to learn about norms and behaviors and so forth. The identities that they see in books and toys and games around them is also really important and can be used to sort of help process these big issues with them. And also the community that the parent or the caregiver surrounds the child with kind of sets their idea of what is normative, what is normal. So there's great power in being intentional about the community that we surround our children with. And we also, if you can go to the next slide, my partner and I use the framing of the 6 building blocks of, I think I told you the wrong slide, the 6 building blocks of anti-racist parenting that can also be used here. And I'll just quickly walk you through them. If we can go to slide 8. Awesome. So the first one is continuous learning. It's on us as parents and caregivers to really do that very necessary unlearning and learning around our own ideas about identity and belonging. I grew up in Trinidad and Tobago in a very conservative Christian household. And I can tell you that the things we learned about gender identity, about sexuality, about race was very, very limited and very, very binary. So I had to do a lot of unlearning myself to really be in a place where I'm able to have an expansive approach with my children as it pertains to issues of identity and belonging. Consistent conversations. And I use the word conversations broadly. It doesn't have to be, as we said before, you're not going to sit down with your young child and try to talk about big topics. Consistent action is what I would say. Keep visiting the conversations, keep using the books and the tools and so forth over and over, keep revisiting it so that your kids know that these conversations and these topics are just a part of what you discuss and what you focus on within the home. These are the values of the home. Community action. This is really important. Taking your kids into the community, making sure that when it pertains to the activities that they do on weekends, when it pertains to their after-school activities and so forth, that you're considering issues of identity and belonging, and you're making sure that their community is representative of a wide range of identities. Reflective media. We want to make sure that the books and the games and the toys that our kids are surrounded by reflects the multiracial world that our children are inhabiting. Even if your community per se is not multiracial, we want to equip them to go out into the world and to be able to exist in a world where there are many different identities. If you're feeling overwhelmed and you don't know where to start with reflective media, Vivvi and I are working on a book list for you, and we're going to be able to send that out after this webinar so that you can have some board books, you can have some tools that you can start with. Intentional environment. It's very important that we be intentional about the community that you surround your kids with. If your community is predominantly white and heteronormative and cisgender, then that's what your kid is going to internalize as normal. So having some intention around that is very important. And being in deep relationship with folks is also very important. Thinking about intentionality, but also thinking about leading with relationships. And parent and caregiver modeling. I mentioned this a little bit before, but we know that our kids look to us. Sometimes they don't listen to us, but they look at what we do, and they look at how we interact with other people, and they look at how we deal with different situations, and how we ourselves talk about things like gender and immigration status and disability and race and so forth. And they are learning from us on a continuous basis about what are the norms of the family, what are the values of the family as it pertains to these different attributes.
You want to go to slide 9, Tabitha?
Sure. How to talk to kids about identity and diversity. So I put a little asterisk next to the word diversity because language is flawed. And I use the word diversity in a very sort of imperfect way, because when I think about diversity, I think about diverse compared to what is considered to be the normative values that we're labeling people as diverse compared to. So I prefer to use the term like varied identities and so forth. But of course, diversity is a word that when you use it, people know what you mean. So I use the term in a very imperfect way. But as we talk about talking to little kids about identity and also diversity, centering different facets of identity is very important. Age, gender, race, ethnicity, and also immigration status, and decentering society's normative approach to these attributes. So if, let's say, for instance, you're talking in front of your child, or you're having a conversation with your child, and you don't know somebody's pronouns, then instead of saying mom or dad, you say parent. Saying sibling instead of brother or sister, just normalizing that if we don't know somebody's pronouns, we're not going to assume that we know them. incorporate they them pronouns into play. The way that I do that with my daughter is that I always ask her, like, what are this doll's pronouns? And we also read books with a variety of pronouns as well, but introducing it into play, because we know that play is the worlds that our children live in. It's through it's how they learn, it's how they process things, it's how they express themselves. So introducing it into play is also very crucial. Asking questions where they veer, when they veer into the binaries. So what if Elsa's mom, what if Elsa has two moms? Many of our kids are like very into Frozen. I'll tell you a story about my daughter and Frozen in a little while. But what if Elsa had two moms? Could Eddie's parents be living in another country? What is that like for them? Do you, and it's also thinking about when you see something that is an example of inclusion, that is an example of including more kids and people into spaces, pointing it out. So you can see, like, do you think this playground would work for someone who uses a wheelchair if you see a playground with a ramp? Just really introducing those ideas into conversations with them and helping them fine-tune their lens around thinking about identity and belonging in all areas of their lives, at home, in school, on the playground, and so forth.
Tabitha, I love the idea of not waiting for them to give you the opportunity to ask more questions, but really looking at the space around them. And that last example of, would this work for someone with a wheelchair? My daughter recently asked me the same question, or she didn't ask me the question. She noticed that we were on a beach that had wheelchair accessibility, and she acknowledged it. She said, "Oh, look, people in wheelchairs can come to the beach too." And so it's interesting to think about it in the reverse, where you're looking for those opportunities rather than waiting for them to present themselves to you.
Right.
And before we move on to the next slide, please feel free, anyone on this call, to go ahead and put some questions in the chat box, and we'll do our very best to answer them along the way. So just a friendly reminder. And then this is all such great information. And so I'm just wondering what tools parents can use to start the conversations about diversity and inclusion, and how can we be more deliberate, right, about our actions at home. I think that's such a great example, just that one right there around, looking at the environment. But how can you get parents started?
Yeah, so I am like a really big fan of books. My home is like, there are books in like every single corner of my house. But even starting from a very young age, using board books and other books that, show a variety of skin tones and different identities and so forth. And something that I do, I'm actually working on an article about gift giving from loved ones, because we shouldn't be afraid as the parent, as the caregiver, to give guidance to our loved ones about the gifts that they give to our children. Because I think that can be helpful for them in terms of fine-tuning their lens. And it can also make sure that the toys and the games and the books that are coming into our homes are reflective of the multiracial, there's that word again, diverse, multi-identity worlds that we all live in. And sometimes my daughter's 5 years old, she just turned 5. So sometimes what we do is we would read a page, point out observations, encourage sensory play. And parents shouldn't feel pressure to be like, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to read this whole book tonight during bedtime. Even if you read 1 or 2 pages, remember that you're using these books as tools to help further this conversation. So even if you read, let's say, 1 page and you point out some observations, I recently read this really great resource from Aorta, where they were talking about how to have open-ended conversations and how to maybe have conversations that have a little bit more structure. And what really resonated with me was their structure around 3 things: asking, what do you observe, what do you feel, and what do you think? So I think that's a great way to build for kids, because you may open a book with them and the book may be amazing and it may be a good tool, but if you jump right into, what do you think about this? Your kid may be a little overwhelmed, like, okay, I haven't even formed opinions. I'm still kind of looking to observe. So starting off with, what do you observe? What do you feel? And what do you think is a good structure? Yes, there are definitely books that I would recommend if I'm reading, yes, about those with developmental differences. We can definitely provide some books in the resource list that incorporate books that are for people with also developmental differences. And also revisit books that emulate the values that you want to center while resonating with your kids. Like my daughter is very much into unicorns and princesses. So what we do is we seek out books with Black unicorns with darker skin and so forth. Or for instance, we'll seek out princesses with like curly hair and darker skin and bodies that are of variation of sizes and shapes and so forth. So, and there's this really incredible book that she was really into at one point about princesses who wear pants. So all of these books, so you kind of intersect the values that you want to teach with the things that they're already really in love with and that really resonate with them. That's kind of like the sweet spot that I always look for to sort of get her attention. So those are just some ways I think that we can be a little bit more deliberate using books and so forth. I think how we talk about other people in front of our children is very important. If you're talking about somebody else, you can talk about, I didn't get a chance to ask them what their pronouns were. Do you know what their pronouns are? We talked about this before, the choices parents make as it pertains to the community that's surrounding their child will really define what is normal for that child. And we spoke about this already, the choices that you make in terms of who's leading after school activities, who are the other kids in the after school activity classes, what are you doing with your weekends? Where are you taking your kids on the weekends? Many of you are maybe joining from New York. I don't know if some of you are joining from across the country or even the world, but if you live in a city, many cities have a lot of activities that really include and consider a variety of identities. I'll pass it back to you, Christie.
Yeah, Jess, if you want to go to the next slide, it kind of just speaks to what can you do. And I'm also going to tie this into a different question that I think that can probably be covered on this slide. And some of these questions came in pre-submitted, but thinking about how we as parents can address things that are just unseen, right? Like not understanding maybe somebody's religion or family structure. How does a parent help lean into that so that we're being sensitive and making sure that we're having those conversations with our children, that our community can be different than what our family structure looks like, right? And just being sensitive to that and bringing that to the surface for conversation with children.
Yeah, for sure. And we know some of these things like religion can actually be seen. Like if some people who are Jewish wear kippah, some people who are Christian may wear a cross. So some of them can also be seen. But for those that are unseen, we all hold biases that we've been taught over time. And it's really on us to really unpack those biases and to be intentional and aware of how it shows up around us and how it shows up in our parenting. And the research also shows that just being aware of biases is not enough to change behavior, that we actually have to interrupt these biases in all areas of our lives, interrupt these assumptions, and they're all around us. So sometimes it can feel a little bit like we're pushing upstream. For kids that are super young, we have an expansive approach to identity. And I want to emphasize celebrating identity, education of identity, and bringing into the community all aspects of identity, and just ensuring that the community is a safe place for people to be themselves fully, I think is really crucial for children to see and for them to be able to witness. And also, I'll tell you a little bit. I grew up in Trinidad, as I mentioned before, Trinidad and Tobago, and my immediate family was very sort of not expansive, very conservative, very closed. But my grandmother, for every holiday in Trinidad, she would celebrate it. She would celebrate Eid, Diwali, Christmas, and she had a very expansive approach to identity, and to especially identities that were unseen as well. So we always felt like we can bring our full selves into who we were as we were living in Trinidad. And my son, we've tried to emulate those values with my son so that he's aware of the ones that are seen, but he's making space for the ones that are unseen as well. So recently he asked us, he said, you know, my teacher asked me if I celebrate Eid, and I actually don't know if we celebrate Eid. And I was like, well, we've been to iftars, we've been to Eid celebrations, and we want to have that expansive approach, which is not how this country is built. It's not what's encouraged in this country. It's folks want to separate and divide and so forth. But I think if we all parent from an expansive place and we encourage our children to make space for the unseen and the seen, I think it's a parenting practice that can help our kids understand that even for the ones that are not seen, that we have to make space for them as well.
Mhm. Great, thank you. Is there anything else you wanted to address on the slide, or are you good? Move on to the next one. No, I
What
diverted
can
you
you
with
do?
that other question too. I mean, I think you've covered a lot of it, but I just want to make sure because I definitely distracted you with my question.
No, it's totally okay. Distractions are a-okay. So what can we do as parents? We talked about this before. Maybe thinking about not seeing lessons about identity and belonging as like, okay, this thing that I'm going to sit and do with my kids at a specific time every week, but really thinking about how you can infuse it into many different areas of your life, how you can infuse observations, how you can infuse values and so forth into just everyday life. Centering joy and liberation is a really, really big thing. Kids know joy, and it resonates with them in a very significant way. And when we center joy, then they understand that fighting for liberation for everybody is a joyful practice. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's exhausting, but the world that we want to create where everybody belongs, where there's space for everyone to be ourselves fully, that world is joyful. So we want to help our kids exist in that joy, even as we struggle against these systems of oppression. Don't wait until something happens in the news to feel the urgency to do something. And I know that one of the questions before that we got before was sort of, when do I talk to my kids about this? Do I wait until something happens, or do I start the conversation with them? And, you know, we talked a little bit earlier about the research that shows that kids are processing these ideas and so forth in age and kid appropriate ways, but they're processing before adults think that they're ready. So I would suggest not waiting until something happens in the news or even with your child to bring up conversations, to bring these values into the home, and infusing it into everyday life. We spoke a lot about intentionality, about community and surrounding. And I want to make this note here that as you're looking for books and media and toys and so forth that center characters of various identities, yes, the folks in history are very important. Our kids need to understand the historical context of the world we're living in, but also like just books with people living life, just having joy. We spoke about joy earlier, just being present in themselves is also very important, and it helps normalize the world that we want to give birth to.
Amazing. Thank you. On the next
these
slide,
are
on this slide right here, I'd love you to expand on what this is.
These are one thing that I would love for folks to take away from this webinar is that integrating kids into our lives as it pertains to how we process identity and belonging and activism and action and all these wonderful things is very, very important. One of the pictures is with my daughter. I was running a workshop and she was there with me, and she actually took part in the activities with me, and she actually helped me with some of the questions that we had before. My son is also very instrumental. So helping us work through when we do workshops with kids, he helps us work through questions and activities and so forth. And he also styles me, by the way. He has a very great sense of style. So he styles me for my workshops. He's like, kids love color, mom. You got to wear more color.
It's true.
So this is a picture. This is a picture of him at a march with me. We went to DC to march for rights for people who can give birth. So bringing kids into these activities with us is also very important, because they start to learn that this is just what we do as a family. We, going back to the 6 building blocks of anti-racist parenting that could be applied to belonging and identity, community action, intentional environment, all these things are just parts of the whole of infusing these values into your lives with your children. And also, I think my kids are very cute. So I got permission. My son hardly ever gives me permission to share his picture. And I got permission, so.
Let them all know we thank him and we think he is adorable. And adding children to any presentation is always uplifting. So now's a great opportunity if anybody has any questions to go ahead and put them in the chat box. But we do have a couple that were pre-submitted, Tabitha, if you don't mind me asking.
Sure.
And I know I have been in a similar situation as this, but somebody's toddler recently made a comment about someone else's skin color in front of that person, and the parent didn't know what to say, and it made them feel uncomfortable. And so how would you recommend a parent manage this situation with their child?
So this is actually a question that I get quite a lot, because kids are kids and they make observations about the world around them, and they say what's on their mind in a very liberal, refreshing way. So I think the first thing that I would think about is, why is the parent uncomfortable? Is the parent or caregiver uncomfortable because they have not been having these conversations with the child? Are they uncomfortable because they have not delved into their own identity, questions about their own identity? Or are they uncomfortable because the comment was actually maybe racist and offensive? So let's tackle the last one first. If the comment is offensive and racist, you can model for your child what apologizing looks like. And my partner and I teach 3 steps to apologizing, which is, I'm sorry, are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help? So really focusing on the reparative parts of the harm that's been done. And I want to stress for parents that if your child says something embarrassing, racist, offensive in front of somebody, do not censor your own embarrassment over the harm that's actually been done, over the harm that's actually landed on the person that's been harmed, which is very hard to do as parents, but we really need to focus on the reparative work that needs to happen. So that is if the comment was offensive. Let's say, for instance, it was just an observation, and the parent is just uncomfortable because they made an observation in public. You can probably say something like, yes, that's interesting. That is an observation for sure. That is this person's skin color, just the same way this is your skin color. Do you have any questions? What do you observe? What do you feel? What do you think? And then I would just turn to the adults. Maybe it's an adult, maybe it's a child, and just be like, they're learning. We're going to continue talking about this at home. That's what I would recommend. I also just want to say that kids are learning and growing about the world around them. I recently saw a video with a person with visible disabilities, and they said that kids often make comments about them in public. And the thing that makes it uncomfortable for them is when the parent is really uncomfortable. So being able to distinguish, was it harmful? If it's not harmful, here's what you should do. If it's not harmful, it's an opportunity for you to deepen those conversations with your child and to further them at home.
Great. Thank you, Tabitha. I have another question for you, if you don't mind. Another one. So do you have any tips specifically for Black families raising kids in predominantly white communities? That's part 1 of the question. And part 2 is, and how can families start positive race conversations at home when there is not necessarily that same positivity and messaging coming from those in their community?
This is a really, really big topic that my partner and I have been working on a podcast episode about. So firstly, I want to say that not everybody has the privilege to be able to live where they want. Sometimes people have to move because of jobs or because of family and so forth. So first of all, if you have the ability to sort of control and decide where you live, it really benefits your child to make sure that the community around them is made up of people of varied identities. So that's number 1. Number 2, if you do not have the choice, it is not on the child to sort of figure out how to deal with racialized harm. It's really on the parent and or the caregiver to educate or to make sure that the people around them are educated around how do you actually create an environment for a child of the global majority to live and to thrive and to be able to live the life that they deserve and to be themselves fully in every space. I'll pause for a second. I use the term person of the global majority instead of person of color because person of global majority is more expansive, and we know that folks of varied identities make up the majority of the world. So I just wanted to add that note about language. Going back to the original question, we know that racialized harm can affect self-image, can affect self-esteem, can be stressful for children. So we do not want our children to feel like they have to handle other people's lack of an adequate lens or racism and so forth. So it's really on the parents to make sure that they do not have to deal with these things. Now, the reality is that if you're living in a predominantly white community, chances are that your child is going to experience some kind of racialized harm. So it's also on the parents to make sure that they are creating a culture and a safe place within the home so that when this happens, the child knows that they can come to their parent or caregiver to process this and to be able to know, okay, this is what's going to happen. And this is what my parent is going to do to interrupt this and to make sure that whoever in the community has done the harm or institution, because sometimes it's institutions, that is unacceptable and it's not going to be tolerated. So I hope that was helpful. I think the second part of your question, did I answer the whole question?
I think you did. Yeah, you did. Yes, you did. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, I think we have time for maybe one more. I don't see anybody putting in any questions in the chat box, but feel free to do that. But I do have one more question for you, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. What are some ways that family can build pride in multiracial intersectional identities? So for example, their son is Mexican, Black, white, and has two moms. So how do they manage and support that?
I love that question. We also have a multiracial family. I am Afro-Indo-Trinidadian and my husband is a white Jewish man. And we teach our kids about three key things about identity. One, your identity is not a pie. You're not half of this or half of that. You're all of each. And that's a beautiful thing. You get to explore each culture as it relates to you. And we really encourage, I use this word all the time, an expansive approach to exploring identity. The second thing is like, don't let anybody define your identity for you. We live in a country where there's a tendency to want to put people in a box depending on their racial identity, depending on their family structure. Don't let people do that for you. Really raise your kids to have a strong sense of self, so that they understand that when people try to define them, that's a them issue. That's not a you issue. And for this family, I would just say, like, every family is just awesome the way that they are. The child has two moms to love you. Every child needs love and safety. And if you have that, then like, that's amazing. One note for parents is that, you know, there's power in exploring all the different cultures when you are in a multicultural family, centering joy and fun, taking them to different festivals and parades and cultural celebrations, and really normalizing the culture. My partner and I, we play soca music, which is Trinidadian music, in the house all the time during carnival season. Carnival is like this big festival in Trinidad. We pick our favorite songs with our son and we play it and we dance together. Our kids are familiar with Trinidadian food. They're very picky eaters, but they have their favorites at the same time. And then we celebrate all the Jewish holidays and we do Shabbat every Friday night. We're working at doing Shabbat every Saturday as well. We're getting there, but we do Shabbat every Friday night, and we just encourage them to deepen their understanding around their own identity in every way. And also building community is important. And it doesn't have to be family, biological family, it could be chosen family as well. And also mirrors. Mirrors are very important. You want your kids to see that there are people around them who look like them, who are like them, who are thriving, who are happy, and who are aging and doing so with joy and with a sense of groundedness. So all of those things, I think parents need to be intentional about really surrounding their kids with.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much, Tabitha. This has been such a great session. I know for me as a mom, and I hope that for everybody else on this call, you are taking away something that is added to your toolkit as a parent to be able to support your children and the community around you. Any closing words, Tabitha, before we sign off?
Closing words. I think if I can leave everyone on this webinar with one thing, is just expand your community, expand the books that your children read, expand the books that you read, expand your perspective on life. We want to create a place, a space, a global community that is safe and affirming and joyful for everyone. And I think we all have a part to play in that. And I think we can do it. I mean, it's the world that I'm struggling and fighting for. So I think we can do it. Thank
you so much. Thank you for your time. We will stay on for another minute or two. If anybody has any last minute questions that we haven't been able to cover that you'd like to throw in the chat box. But other than that, thank you for joining and have a wonderful rest of your week and weekend ahead.
Thank you so much, everyone. It was great to be here.